Have you ever told yourself, I'm fine now, I've moved on, but deep down, something still feels broken? You smile, you function, you even help others, but when the lights go out and you're alone with your thoughts, there's a silence that feels more like a scream. That, my friend, is the illusion of healing. And it's more common than you think. Today, we're diving deep into the 7 signs. You think you're healing emotionally, but you're actually not. And once you see the truth, there's no going back. This is your wake-up call, your mirror, and your chance to finally set your soul free. There is a quiet kind of suffering that many carry, a silent burden cloaked in composure. One learns, often unconsciously, to adapt, to endure, to keep moving forward without ever truly looking back. And in this endurance, a subtle illusion takes root. The belief that because we are functioning, we must be healing. But the soul is not so easily deceived. To hide pain is not the same as to heal it. When we repress what aches within us, we are not transcending it. We are burying it deeper. The unconscious, that vast and powerful undercurrent of the psyche, does not forget what the conscious mind seeks to deny. It stores every wound, every heartbreak, every moment of betrayal or abandonment, and waits patiently for the day when it must be faced. One may smile, offer kindness, carry on with life, but beneath the surface, the unresolved still festers. Many people live in this state of psychological dissonance. They appear outwardly stable, competent, even joyful. They attend social gatherings, perform their duties, offer advice to others, and seem entirely composed. But if one were to look closely to truly see, not the face, but the energy behind the eyes, they would notice the signs. The subtle flinch when a certain topic is mentioned. The tightening in the jaw when emotions begin to surface. The quick shift in conversation away from vulnerability. These are not signs of healing. They are signs of evasion. The pain we hide does not disappear. It simply finds new ways to manifest. Sometimes it appears as chronic fatigue, as unexplained anxiety, as a relentless need to be busy. Sometimes it cloaks itself in perfectionism, in control, in the inability to rest. And often it takes shape in our relationships. We become avoidant, defensive, overly accommodating, or emotionally unavailable. Not because we are flawed, but because we are protecting the parts of us that still bleed. There is a vast difference between coping and healing. Coping is necessary. It helps us survive. But it is not the end goal. Healing requires more than functioning. It demands feeling. It asks us to walk willingly into the very memories we've tried to forget. It asks us to sit in the discomfort, to allow the tears, the anger, the grief that we have long suppressed. And this, for many, is terrifying, because to feel is to be vulnerable. To feel is to admit that something hurt us more deeply than we wanted to acknowledge. But here lies the paradox. Only through vulnerability can we be made whole. The wound is the place where the light enters. When we finally stop pretending, when we take off the armor and speak our truth, not for sympathy, but for liberation, we create space for true transformation. What is unconscious becomes conscious. What was once a source of shame becomes a wellspring of strength. The ego resists this process. It prefers the illusion of control. It tells us that to fall apart is weakness, that to cry is indulgent, that to revisit the past is pointless. But the ego does not understand the language of the soul. The soul seeks integration, not avoidance. It seeks to bring the fragmented parts of us back into harmony, not to exile them further. And so, the journey begins not with an act of doing, but with a moment of honesty. A whisper in the stillness that says, I am not as okay as I pretend to be. That whisper, though small, is profound. It signals the cracking of the mask, the loosening of the persona, the beginning of authenticity. To truly heal, we must create the inner conditions for healing to occur. We must cultivate gentleness toward ourselves, become curious rather than judgmental. We must ask, what is this pain trying to teach me? Rather than, how can I make it go away? We must allow our hearts to break open, not to collapse, but to expand. Because in that expansion lies our humanity, our depth, our ability to connect not only with others, but with the most forgotten parts of ourselves. When one hides pain, they live in fragments. When one heals it, they become whole. The path is not easy, but it is the only path that leads to freedom. To avoid what wounds us is a natural instinct. It is the body's first language of survival, the psyche's attempt to protect itself from what once overwhelmed. But avoidance, while seemingly a form of self-preservation, is in truth a postponement of the inevitable. The things we refuse to face do not vanish into nothingness. They retreat into the depths of the unconscious, gaining weight, gaining power, until one day they begin to steer our lives from the shadows. Every unhealed trauma, every buried memory, every emotion we suppress becomes a force that acts upon us without our awareness. We think we are choosing freely, but in truth, we are being guided by ghosts, memories that live in our muscles, fears that echo in our choices, old stories that still script our behavior. When we avoid our triggers, we believe we are staying safe, but we are actually building a life around fear. The trigger itself is not the enemy. It is a messenger. It points not to danger, but to the place within us that has not yet found peace. A certain voice a look, a situation, or even a moment of silence can awaken something long forgotten. The heart races, the breath shortens, the past rushes in, and so we retreat. We change the subject, leave the room, distract ourselves, or lash out. Not because we are weak, but because something inside us has not yet healed. But the wound that is not faced becomes the architect of suffering. We may avoid the people who remind us of past pain, but we carry that pain with us into new relationships. We may change careers, move cities, end friendships, all in an attempt to escape what is unresolved within. But the same patterns reappear, dressed in different forms, until we turn and look directly at what we've spent years running from. We remain bound to it. To face a trigger is not to re-traumatize oneself. It is to reintroduce oneself to what was once unbearable. Now with new eyes, new strength, and a new awareness. There is power in pausing when the pain rises and asking, what part of me is speaking right now? What memory is asking to be witnessed? The soul does not ask us to relive the pain, only to honor it. Healing begins when we stop treating our triggers as enemies and begin to see them as invitations. Avoidance creates a false sense of control. It convinces us that if we can just keep certain doors closed, the monsters behind them will remain silent. But these monsters are nothing more than parts of ourselves that were once cast out. A frightened child, an unheard voice, a betrayed heart. These aspects of our psyche do not need to be defeated. They need to be welcomed home. Only through acceptance can they be transformed. There is profound courage in facing the uncomfortable. It is not the absence of fear that defines the healer. It is the willingness to move toward what frightens us, knowing that on the other side lies liberation. To feel the pain fully without fleeing is to reclaim the parts of ourselves that have long been exiled. Each time we remain present with our discomfort, we send a message to our unconscious. I am no longer abandoning you. This is the journey of individuation, the movement toward wholeness. It is not a straight path. It wins through old grief, forgotten memories, repressed rage, and longings never fulfilled. But in each trigger lies a piece of the puzzle, a fragment of the self that is waiting to be integrated. Avoiding them is to live fragmented. Embracing them is to become whole. To face our triggers is not to court suffering, but to choose freedom. It is to step out of the patterns inherited from a wounded past and step into the authorship of our own becoming. We stop asking life to protect us from what hurts and begin asking ourselves to meet what arises with presence and compassion. And in doing so, we shift from being victims of our past to guardians of our inner world. Each trigger, though painful, is sacred. It carries with it the memory of what once overwhelmed and the opportunity to no longer be overwhelmed. When we stop running, when we turn inward and listen, we discover that what we feared the most was not the memory, but the emotion attached to it. And once that emotion is given space to be felt, it loses its grip. It no longer defines us, it frees us. There is a subtle danger hidden within the culture of forced optimism, of silent repression masked by cheerful words and bright affirmations. To believe that we must always stay positive, even in the presence of deep emotional pain, is to deny the sacred role that sorrow plays in the unfolding of our psyche. When positivity becomes a mask, we begin to lose our authentic connection to the self. The shadow, the part of us that carries grief, rage, loneliness, and fear, does not disappear because we refuse to look at it. On the contrary, it grows stronger in its exile. There are those who have learned to speak only in hope, to project an image of spiritual strength, of resilience, of unwavering faith. But beneath the surface of that smile may live a soul silently crying out for space to grieve. Pain that is denied does not dissolve. It becomes displaced. It slips into our dreams, into our relationships, into our bodies. The physical tightness we feel, the fatigue that lingers, the numbness we can't explain. These are the whispers of emotions pushed too far beneath the surface. The psyche cannot be fooled by appearances. It does not care for how we look to others. It seeks wholeness, and wholeness is not found in one extreme of light, but in the tension and reconciliation of opposites, joy and sorrow, love and loss, beauty and brokenness. When we cling to positivity at the expense of truth, we split the soul. We tell one part, you are welcome here, and the other, you must stay hidden. But the soul cannot thrive in divided territory. Healing requires that we make room for all of ourselves, not just the polished fragments we find acceptable. In the process of individuation, the journey toward psychological integration, we must come to terms with the parts of us that suffer. Not to dwell in suffering endlessly, but to allow it its rightful place. Emotions have their own intelligence, their own timing. Sadness is not a weakness, it is a signal. Anger is not inherently destructive, it is a messenger. Grief is not a failure to move on, it is a testimony to love. When we bypass these emotions with hollow optimism, we betray their wisdom. The danger of the positivity mask is that it creates disconnection. It severs the bridge between us and our inner world and between us and others. When we pretend to be fine, we shut the door to intimacy. We deny others the chance to truly see us. And we rob ourselves of the healing power of being witnessed. There is something profoundly sacred about being able to say, "Oh, I am hurting," and to be met with presence instead of platitudes. In that moment, the pain begins to move. It no longer remains frozen within. We live in a world that often wars moments of authenticity. We are praised for being strong, admired for appearing unshaken, even applauded for enduring silently. But endurance without expression is not healing. It is a slow erosion of the soul. True strength is not found in suppression, but in surrender. Not in denial, but in devotion to what is real. To feel deeply, even when it's uncomfortable, is to honor the full spectrum of human experience. It is to allow life to pass through us in its rawest form, without resistance. There is no shame in the tears you haven't cried. There is no weakness in the rage that simmers beneath your smile. These are not signs of failure. They are signs of life. And life, in all its complexity, cannot be neatly packaged in positive phrases and hopeful quotes. Sometimes, the most profound healing begins in the dark. In the moment you finally say, "This hurts," without trying to soften the truth. Let us not confuse emotional repression with emotional maturity. Let us not hide behind spiritual language or inspirational slogans, when what we truly need is stillness, space, and silence to process what our soul has been holding. The light is not the absence of darkness. It is what emerges when we dare to face the dark without fear. And in doing so, we discover a deeper form of peace, one not built on avoidance, but on acceptance. The path to wholeness does not demand that we always smile. It simply asks that we be honest, that we meet ourselves where we are, without judgment, that we give voice to what was silenced and presence to what was pushed away. In this radical honesty, we begin to return, not to an idealized version of ourselves, but to the one who has been waiting patiently beneath the mask, aching to be seen. We are not as free as we believe ourselves to be. The choices we make, especially in love, are rarely born solely from present clarity. More often, they are echoes shaped by the imprint of our earliest emotional experiences. If the same pattern keeps unfolding in your relationships, if the pain feels familiar, though the faces have changed, you are not cursed. You are unconsciously repeating a story written long ago. The psychic clings to what it knows, even when what it knows brings suffering. Until we become conscious of the wound, we will recreate it again and again, hoping for a different ending. The partners we choose, the dynamics we fall into, the roles we assume, these are not accidents. They are mirrors. The one who neglects you, the one who withholds affection, the one who controls, the one who abandons. These figures may all be different in form, but they are often reenactments of a trauma the soul has not yet resolved. At first, we think we are falling in love, but often we are falling into the arms of a familiar pattern, a psychological script embedded deep in our unconscious. We are drawn to what is familiar, not necessarily what is healthy. And if pain was part of the blueprint we received early in life, if love came with conditions or abandonment or silence, then that is what love will feel like to us now. The psyche seeks completion, not comfort. It returns to the scene of the original wound in an attempt to master it, to rewrite the ending, to finally be seen, heard, or chosen. But the repetition itself becomes the trap. We keep returning to the fire, expecting this time not to be burned. Healing begins with the courage to pause, to look at the pattern not with blame, but with curiosity. Why do I keep attracting those who cannot meet me emotionally? Why do I feel most alive in relationships that are unstable or unavailable or painful? What part of me still believes that suffering is the price of connection? These questions are not meant to shame. They are doorways. They take us inward to the forgotten self who first learned that love could hurt. In this inner landscape, we may find the child who never felt safe to express needs, who was punished for emotions, who was taught to earn affection through performance or silence. That child is not gone. She lives in the choices we make, in the boundaries we fail to hold, in the parts of us that still believe we are unworthy of ease. She seeks healing not through explanation, but through presence. When we finally turn inward and say, I see you, I believe you, you deserve better, we begin the process of reparenting the psyche. It is a painful awakening to realize that we're not unlucky in love. We were repeating love as we once understood it. But this realization is also the threshold of transformation. The moment we see the pattern is the moment we are no longer fully bound to it. We become capable of choice, of recognizing when something feels familiar and choosing not to follow it, of feeling the pull toward chaos and choosing peace instead. This is not a betrayal of the past. It is the honoring of the future self. True healing will often feel unfamiliar. Safe love may at first feel boring. Kindness may be mistaken for weakness. Stability may feel like emptiness when you are used to the high of dysfunction. But this is not a sign that something is wrong. It is a sign that something is shifting. The nervous system begins to recalibrate. The psyche starts to believe that perhaps love does not require self-abandonment. That perhaps intimacy can be tender and honest and safe. In this process, you may grieve. You may mourn not only what was done to you, but what you lost because of it. the years spent in confusion, the love given to those who could not receive it, the energy poured into trying to fix what was never yours to fix. This grief is holy. It is not a backward step, but a forward movement into clarity. To repeat the pattern is human. To recognize it is awakening. And to transcend it, that is the work of the soul. When you finally choose differently, not out of fear, but from a place of deep inner knowing, you do not just change your relationships. You change the inner architecture of your being. You become the one who breaks the chain. You become the one who says, this ends with me. And in doing so, you give yourself and everyone after you the chance to love and be loved without suffering as a condition. There is a deep, often unspoken fear that if we draw a line, if we say no, if we speak our needs clearly, we will no longer be loved. This fear is not logical. It is ancestral, emotional, and embedded in the earliest memories of connection. For many, the act of setting a boundary feels like a betrayal, not of others, but of a deeply rooted belief that love must be earned through sacrifice. And so we give and give and give until the soul becomes a hollow shell of its original self. This is not kindness. It is self-abandonment in disguise. Boundaries are not walls. They are the architecture of a healthy psyche. They define where we end and where another begins. They protect our inner sanctum, our energy, our time, and our emotional truth. But when we grow up in environments where boundaries were violated, ignored, or punished, we internalize the message that having limits makes us difficult, unlovable, or selfish. And so we learn to contort ourselves to become what is needed rather than who we are. We learn to anticipate the moods of others, to overfunction in relationships, to suppress our own discomfort for the sake of harmony. But harmony purchased at cost of authenticity is fragile and false. It does not nourish the soul. It drains it. When we fail to honor our own limits, we teach others that our energy is boundless, our presence unconditional, our silence eternal. And in doing so, we become complicit in our own depletion. This is not a moral failing. It is a psychological wound, one that requires deep compassion to heal. To begin reclaiming our boundaries is to risk confrontation, disapproval, and the loss of relationships that thrived on our compliance. This is terrifying because the child within still believes that love is conditional, that survival depends on being agreeable, on being the caretaker, the peacemaker, the strong one. But we are no longer children, and our healing begins the moment we realize that we do not owe anyone our silence in exchange for connection. The setting of a boundary is an act of individuation, a declaration that says, I exist, I matter, my needs are real. It is not aggressive, it is sacred. It is the point at which the false self begins to dissolve and the true self begins to emerge. And yet, this process is not without grief. You may lose relationships that were built not on mutual respect, but on your willingness to endure. You may feel guilt, not because you've done something wrong, but because you're unfamiliar with putting yourself first. Let this discomfort arise. Let it speak. It is the voice of the old pattern dying. There is great courage in choosing yourself. Not in a selfish way, but in a soulful one. When you honor your boundaries, you teach the world how to treat you. You shift the energetic contract. You no longer make yourself small so that others can feel comfortable. You no longer confuse people, pleasing with love. And you no longer participate in the silent betrayal of your own heart. The paradox is this: the more you honor your boundaries, the deeper your connections become. Not with everyone, but with those who are capable of meeting you where you truly are. Authenticity repels the inauthentic. And this is a blessing. For what is the worth of a connection if it requires you to vanish to maintain it? You are not here to be palatable. You are here to be whole. Psychologically, boundary work is not just about external behavior. It is about inner reprogramming. It is about dismantling the belief that you are responsible for the emotions of others. It is about separating love from obligation. And it is about cultivating the capacity to see the discomfort of someone else's disappointment without making it your own. This is where the real transformation begins. Each time you say no when you mean no, each time you express a truth rather suppress it, each time you walk away from what dishonors your soul, you are building a new inner architecture. One that is rooted not in fear, but in self-respect. And with each of these moments, something miraculous happens. The child within begins to trust you. She sees that she no longer needs to shift to be safe. She begins to believe that her worth is not contingent upon her ability to give herself away. And slowly, the need to be everything for everyone dissolves. What remains is the essence of your true self, untamed, unapologetic, and profoundly worthy of a life that reflects your deepest truth. There is a peculiar comfort in understanding our pain intellectually. We read, we analyze, we talk about our pasts with a calm detachment, convinced that this knowing is healing. But to speak of wounds without feeling them is to touch the surface of the ocean and mistake it for its depths. The mind can be a clever refuge, a sanctuary of logic, where we feel in control. Yet, what we do not feel, we do not truly release. And what remains unfelt continues to live within us, shaping our behaviors, our fears, our relationships silently. but with force. We often confuse knowledge with transformation. We say, I know where this pattern comes from, or I understand my trauma, and in doing so, we believe we've done the work. But healing is not an intellectual process. The psyche does not unfold through explanation. It unfolds through experience. Insight can be the doorway, yes, but only if we are willing to walk through it. And that walk requires us to feel fully, vulnerably, without the safety of distance. There are people who can explain their childhood wounds in detail, who can map out their trauma like a scholar, who speak of their pain as if reading from a textbook. But when emotion stirs, when tears rise or anger begins to burn, they retreat. The body tenses, the breath shortens, the mind rushes in to translate, to explain, to contain. This is not healing. This is management. And while it may keep us from drowning in the depths, it also keeps us from being cleansed by them. The body holds what the mind cannot. Emotions that were too overwhelming at the time of their origin are stored in the nervous system, in the muscles, in the breath. They do not vanish because we've named them. They remain until they are felt, until they are honored, released, and integrated. This is the realm of the soul, not the neatness of thought, but the rawness of experience. We live in a culture that values control. We are taught that to break down is to be weak, that to cry is to be irrational, that to rage is to be dangerous. And so we ascend into the mind where things are tidy, where emotions can be categorized, explained, neutralized. But the soul is not tidy. The path of healing is not linear. It is chaotic, messy, cyclical. It spirals through time. Awakening memories when we least expect, asking us again and again, will you feel me now? To feel is not to regress. It is to return to the moment where something was left unfinished. That moment may be 10 years ago, or 40, or in childhood, when we were too small to carry the weight of what was happening. The adult self can now hold what the child could not, but only if we allow the body to remember, not in facts, but in feeling. There is a reason tears come when we are ready. There is a reason grief surfaces in waves, not sentences. The unconscious does not speak in language. It speaks in image, in sensation, in emotion. And if we wish to be whole, we must speak its language. We must descend from the intellect into the heart, into the gut, into the places we have ignored or feared. This descent is not comfortable. It is not elegant. There may be days when all you can do is sit with the ache. There may be moments when old rage bubbles up, raw and unfamiliar. You may find yourself crying without knowing why. This is the body remembering. This is the soul releasing. It is not pathology. It is progress. and it is sacred. The goal is not to stay in the pain forever, but to allow it its rightful season. Emotion is like weather. It must move through us. When we block it, we become stuck. When we feel it, we become free. And in that freedom, something shifts. Our relationships become more honest. Our choices become more conscious. Our joy becomes more authentic because it is no longer built on avoidance. We stop living in the past when we feel what the past still holds. Not just think about it. Not just talk about it. Feel it. In the body, in the breath, in the stillness of being. And then, almost miraculously, the charge begins to lessen. The story loses its grip. The pain, once frozen in time, begins to thaw. And in that thawing, we remember who we were before we learned to hide behind understanding. We remember how to feel. We remember how to live. There is a silence that speaks louder than any noise. The kind that arises in stillness when the world no longer distracts you and the soul begins to whisper truths you've long avoided. Many seek healing, yet fear the very conditions that allow it to begin. Stillness, solitude, quiet. These are not empty spaces, they are sacred thresholds. But to the unhealed mind, they feel like danger. And so, we keep ourselves busy. We fill every moment with noise, movement, productivity. Anything that keeps us from meeting what lives beneath the surface. To stay busy is to stay numb. It is a culturally sanctioned form of avoidance. We applaud the tireless worker, the constant caregiver, the woman who never stops. We admire her strength while overlooking her exhaustion. But beneath the surface of constant motion is often a wounded self, afraid of what will emerge when the doing stops. For when we are still, the unconscious begins to rise. Feelings we buried long ago surface. Memories we've outpaced begin to call for attention. And the persona we wear, the one polished and composed, begins to crack. This is the crisis and the calling of true healing. It asks not just for our time, but for our presence. Not for our performance, but for our surrender. And surrender can feel like death to the ego, which has built itself upon achievement, control, and self-sufficiency. But healing is not earned through effort. It is allowed through presence. And presence can only be cultivated in stillness. The soul does not speak in deadlines or schedules. It speaks in symbols, emotions, synchronicities, dreams. And if we do not make time to listen, we live disconnected from our own inner wisdom. We chase goals that do not satisfy us. We enter relationships that repeat the past. We search for answers in the external world while the real guidance waits patiently within. The tragedy is not that we are broken. It is that we are too distracted to notice we've never truly met ourselves. Many fear stillness because they fear the truth. They fear the grief that might surface, the regret, the rage, the longing. These are not easy visitors. But they are not here to harm you. They are here to be witnessed, to be felt, to be released. The pain you avoid in stillness is the very thing keeping you from peace. It is not the feeling itself that hurts the most. It is the resistance to feeling it. We brace ourselves against our own emotional waves, believing we might drown. But the soul does not wish to drown you. It wishes to cleanse you. We must ask ourselves, what am I afraid to feel? What do I believe will happen if I stop? Who will I be when I am no longer defined by what I do? These are the uncomfortable but necessary questions of individuation. The process by which the self becomes whole. It is not found in endless striving, but in sacred pausing, in letting ourselves be without the mask, without the title, without the need to perform. There is a wisdom that lives in the stillness, a remembering. It is the voice that says, you are not what happened to you. You are not your roles. You are not your wounds. It is the voice that knows your essence before the world told you who to be. But to hear that voice, we must first clear the noise. We must sit quietly in the discomfort of nothingness and trust that something meaningful will rise. This practice is not passive. It is the most courageous act of the soul. To stop moving and still feel worthy. To stop fixing and still feel whole. To meet yourself without distraction and not look away. This is where true healing begins. In the breath, in the moment, in the sacred space of being with what is. Not trying to change it. Not trying to escape it. Just being with it. Fully. In the end, it is not more knowledge, more doing, or more control that brings us home to ourselves. It is the willingness to be with our own hearts in silence and hear what they have been waiting to say. This is the alchemy of stillness. It is not emptiness. It is presence. And presence is where the soul returns to its rightful place. Not as something to be fixed, but as something to be felt, honored, and finally set free. Control is seductive. It gives the illusion of safety, of certainty, of order in a world that is often chaotic and unpredictable. It becomes a defense, a structure built around the soul to shield it from the pain of loss, rejection, betrayal. Anything that once made us feel powerless. But beneath the compulsion to control lies a much deeper truth fear. And behind that fear, unacknowledged grief. For those who have been hurt, especially in early relationships, control becomes a form of survival. If I can predict it, I can prepare for it. If I can manage it, it won't hurt me again. But the psyche does not thrive in rigidity. It longs for freedom, for trust, for surrender. Control is the ego's strategy to avoid vulnerability. And yet, vulnerability is the doorway to healing. The more we attempt to control everything around us, our relationships, our environment, our emotions, the further we drift from our inner truth. We begin to live in a fortress where everything is monitored, managed, and restrained. But in doing so, we cut ourselves off from spontaneity, from intimacy, and from the mystery that gives life its depth. Control may offer comfort, but it also confines. It keeps us from experiencing the very things we long for: connection, peace, and joy. The need for control is often born from a time when chaos was the norm, when the people we depended on were unpredictable, emotionally unavailable, or unsafe. We internalized the belief that the only way to feel secure was to manage every detail. We became hypervigilant, scanning for danger, trying to read the emotional temperature of every room. We learned that uncertainty was dangerous, that surrender was weakness, that letting go meant being hurt. And so we hardened. We organized our world so carefully that even joy became a risk we could not afford. But joy, like love, cannot be controlled. It must be received. It arises in the spaces where the soul is allowed to breathe, where we are not gripped by the need to calculate every outcome. The paradox is that the more we try to control, the more anxious we become. Because life does not obey our expectations. People will disappoint us. Plans will unravel. Emotions will surface. And the more we fight against this reality, the more suffering we create. True healing begins when we recognize that control is not safety. It is a prison. And the key to that prison lies in trust. Trust not in perfection, but in our own capacity to meet whatever arises. To trust life is to understand that we may not be able to stop the pain, but we can choose how we respond to it. We can allow it to shape us without shattering us. We can feel it without being consumed by it. This is the strength that the ego cannot offer. The strength of the soul, which does not cling, but surrenders with dignity and grace. Letting go of control does not mean becoming passive. It means becoming responsive rather than reactive. It means stepping into the flow of life, allowing it to carry us into unknown places, knowing that we have the inner resources to navigate what comes. It is not about giving up. It is about softening. It is about moving from force to faith, from manipulation to alignment, from fear to presence. This shift is not easy. There will be moments when everything in you wants to tighten, to grip, to fix. These moments are invitations. They are calls from the unconscious, asking you to return not to the illusion of control, but to the truth of your being. Ask yourself, what am I afraid will happen if I let go? Who taught me that control equals love? Where in my life can I begin to trust, even just a little? The answers to these questions are not found in thought alone. They are revealed through experience, through the daily practice of loosening your grip, of choosing presence over prediction, of letting the heart speak louder than the mind. And each time you do, the fear softens, the walls lower, and the soul, long confined, begins to breathe again. When you stop controlling everything, you make space for life to surprise you, for the unknown to become a gift rather than a threat, for relationships to deepen, not through domination, but through authenticity, for your own inner self to emerge, not shaped by fear, but born from freedom. This is the alchemy of surrender. It is not weakness. It is the highest form of strength, the kind that does not need to dominate because it is rooted in wholeness. Let me ask you something. How many of these signs did you recognize in yourself? And if you did, are you willing to stop pretending you've healed and finally commit to doing the real, beautiful, sometimes messy work of healing? Because you are not here to live half alive. You are not here to smile for the world while silently suffering behind closed doors. You are here to rise. So drop a comment below and tell me which sign hit you the hardest today. Let's talk about it. You are not alone in this. And if this message stirred something in you, if it opened your eyes or softened your heart, please share, and subscribe to the channel. Someone else out there needs to hear this too. And before you go, tell me in the comments, what topic should we dive into next? Your voice matters here. This isn't just a channel. It's a community. And we grow together. You thought you were healing. Now it's time to truly begin.